The storm clawed at the Rockies like it meant to tear the mountains down. Snow fell sideways, thick and furious, burying every path, silencing every sound that wasn't wind or fear. The world outside had turned white and unforgiving. Inside a one-room cabin pressed into the base of a ridge, Eli Moran stood barefoot on cold floorboards, wrapping his hands around a battered kettle. He hadn't slept. Not really. Men like him rarely did. The fire in the wood stove crackled low, casting restless orange light across the walls. His breath still fogged in the air. That meant it was bad outside, worse than expected. He glanced at the dog by the door. Axel, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat that looked forged from smoke and ash, lay coiled but alert. He had scars under that fur, some visible, others not. His eyes tracked Eli's every move, not out of need, but loyalty, the kind that no leash or command could teach. He had once pulled a wounded boy from under a flipped MRAP in Helmand Province. He had once refused to leave the side of a fallen handler for 3 straight days. Eli had read the reports. Then he met the dog, and the reports felt tame. The kettle began to whisper, steam coiling. That's when it came. 3 knocks, then again. 3, then again. 3. Not fists pounding, not desperate hammering. This was practiced, trained, rhythmic. Military, number, law enforcement, maybe. Eli turned toward the door but didn't move. Axel rose before he did, ears standing tall, tail stiff, body shifting low like a loaded spring. No bark. Just a rumble in his chest, low and serious, the sound he made when something didn't sit right in his bones. Eli stepped to the table and turned down the lamp. The shadows grew long. He reached for the old flashlight, the one with the duct-taped grip, then moved to the narrow side window. Frost feathered the glass. He scraped it clean with the heel of his hand and peered out. Nothing. Just swirling snow and black timber. He slid open the hatch door, a 4-inch square he'd carved years ago, not for greetings, but for judgment calls. Cold slapped his face like a glove. He squinted into the void. "State your business," he said, voice flat and unmoved. There was a beat of silence, then a young voice, ragged and shaking. "Officers. Lost in the storm. We need shelter." Please, Axel's growl deepened. Eli turned his head slowly towards the dog. Axel didn't break his gaze from the door. His muscles tensed. That meant the scent wasn't right. Eli pressed the flashlight to the crack and tilted it just enough. 2 figures emerged from the storm. Both male, uniformed. One was half collapsed against the porch post, frost-bitten fingers clutching the rail. The other stood upright, older, steadier, but spent. Snow caked their shoulders, and their faces looked stripped raw by wind and fear. "Badgers," Eli said. The older one pulled his from under a soaked parka. It glinted faintly in the beam. "I'm Bennett. This is Tyler Cruz. We lost our unit, our comms. The cruiser's gone. He's got frostbite. We won't make it another hour out here." Eli watched them like a sniper reads terrain. He counted seconds. Not because he didn't believe them, because he couldn't afford to be wrong. Axel shifted to Eli's side. His nose worked the air through the seam in the door. And then his body went still. His ears tilted forward. His tail didn't wag. He gave one short chuff, the kind that meant, "We don't have time to wait." Eli unlatched the heavy bolt. When he opened the door, the storm punched through, flinging snow across the floor and into the fire's glow. The younger cop stumbled in first, half carried by the other, his eyes rolling with exhaustion. Axel circled them once, brushing past their legs like a current of muscle and suspicion. The door shut. The latch dropped. Mason lowered Tyler into the chair closest to the fire, carefully unwinding his gloves. His fingers were pale, edges tinged blue. He was young, couldn't have been more than 24. His lips were cracked. He hadn't spoken since they stepped in. Eli said nothing at first. Just watched. Let the quiet settle like dust. Let Axel decide. The dog stood between them and the stove, unmoving, eyes locked on Mason now, not Tyler, watching his every breath. Didn't think anyone lived this far out. Mason offered. Didn't think anyone would knock. Eli answered. Axel finally shifted. Not relaxed. Not yet. But he moved back to Eli's heel. Sit. Warm your hands. But if you're lying to me, you'd better start praying. Mason gave a breathless laugh that held no humor. I'm not. We were tracking something before the storm turned. Doesn't matter now. Just... Thanks for letting us in. Eli poured water from the kettle into chipped metal cups, pushed one toward Mason. You should have said something sooner. Mason's brows knit. Said what? Axel growled again. Eli didn't blink. You're not alone out there. Mason froze. For half a second, too long. Eli stepped closer. Axel moved forward without a word. That was when Mason's mask slipped, not entirely, but enough for Eli to see it. The fear wasn't just from the cold. And something far worse was still out in that storm. The kettle hissed behind them. Axel didn't break his stare, and neither did Eli. Not yet. The fire was burning steady now, thick spruce logs popping as they settled into their own heat. The young officer Tyler Cruz, he said, sat with both boots off, bundled in a wool blanket Eli had thrown his way. His cheeks were raw with windburn, lips split, one eye drifting as he fought to stay awake. His partner, Bennett, hunched beside him, sipping tea slowly, the cup rattling against his gloves. Eli Moran hadn't said much since the door closed. That was how he liked it. Let people fill silence with truth or mistakes. He knew the value of silence. In Fallujah, silence saved lives. In Montana, it did the same. Axel sat near the hearth, but not relaxed. His ears were up, his nose twitching, eyes never fully leaving the two guests. His focus, however, had narrowed. He watched Bennett more than Cruz, watched the way the man scanned the room, the way his fingers twitched near the side of his coat. Not aggressive, not obvious, but Axel didn't need obvious. He picked up what Eli had long trained out of himself gut sense. You from down in Redstone? Eli asked, casually pouring another mug. Bennett nodded too fast. Yeah, substation near mile 47. We're on winter patrol. Sweep and pass. Got caught up northeast when the whiteout rolled in. Redstone doesn't usually push patrols this far into the ridgeline. Bennett blinked. New coverage zone. They extended it last quarter. Eli didn't answer, just handed him the mug and returned to the table. His eyes flicked to Cruz. The kid was shivering under the blanket, but not from cold anymore. It was something deeper. Burnout, panic slowly cooling into realization. You got radio contact? Eli asked, this time not pretending to be casual. Bennett reached for his jacket, unzipped the outer layer, and pulled free a handheld. He held it up, pushed a button. A static click. No signal. Dead. Antenna iced over or snapped, might be the elevation. Let me take a look. Eli held out his hand. Bennett hesitated. Just a beat. Long enough for Axel to rise. The dog stood, moved 2 slow steps forward, and stopped directly between Bennett and Eli. The room changed. Bennett handed the radio over. Here. Eli took it, examined the base. The unit was standard issue, but the antenna wasn't broken. It had been cleanly detached. Screws still loose in the housing. That wasn't storm damage. That was intentional. He didn't call it out, not yet. You're bleeding, Eli said, pointing to a small smear at Cruz's temple. The kid touched his forehead, winced. Must have clipped a branch or something when we fell. I don't remember. You fall hard enough to black out? Cruz looked to Bennett. Bennett smiled, thin and sharp. It was rough getting through the ravine. We both took some hits. Mind if I see your duty map? Bennett reached into the back pocket of his cargo pants and produced a folded terrain map. Eli unfolded it across the table. The ink had bled in the snow, and someone had tried to circle a route with red marker, but it ran straight through a part of the woods known for unstable ground and steep drop-offs. No patrol took that path, not unless they were green or running blind. You said mile 47, right? Bennett nodded. This path starts closer to 38. That's damn near the quarry line. Bennett's jaw flexed. We took a shortcut. Bad call. Eli nodded slowly. He set the map down, stepped back toward Axel, and knelt. The dog leaned into him, chest vibrating with a low, restless hum. Axel's signal was clear. The air was wrong. Not dangerous yet, but wrong. Cruz suddenly spoke. He doesn't trust us. Both men turned. Cruz's voice was quiet, almost hoarse, but firm now. The dog. He knows something's off. Bennett stood abruptly. He's a dog, Tyler. He growls. That's what they do. Not like that. Cruz locked eyes with Axel, then with Eli. He hasn't taken his eyes off you since we stepped in. He's trained to hold a perimeter, Eli said, especially when he smells blood or fear. Cruz swallowed. We weren't tracking a suspect. That's what we told you. That's not what happened. Bennett turned. Cruz, shut your mouth. But Cruz didn't. We found something. Or someone. A body, maybe. I didn't get a clear look. We were ordered to report it in, but Bennett said we had to keep moving. Then the radio was out. And then... That's enough! Bennett snapped. Eli stepped forward. You ordered him to leave a body behind? Bennett's mouth opened, but no sound came. Axel's growl deepened, sharp and surgical, like a line being drawn. There were footprints, Cruz added, shivering harder now, not from cold. Too many. Not ours. We weren't alone up there. Bennett didn't reach for his sidearm, but Eli saw the tension roll down his arm. He was calculating, looking for control again. Eli stepped directly between him and Cruz. You lied, Eli said. Bennett met his stare. We needed shelter. Then you should have come in clean. Axel moved closer to Bennett, eyes locked, hackles just starting to rise. The message wasn't barked, but it was loud. One wrong move, one wrong word, and this wouldn't be a rescue anymore. Eli didn't raise his voice. You brought trouble through my door, he said, and I want to know how much of it is still coming. No one answered. Not yet. Outside, the storm screamed louder, and somewhere deep in the trees something cracked, a branch, or something else. Cruz was worse than he let on. Eli saw it the moment he peeled back the second layer of sock skin gone waxy, colorless, with blotches of deep gray blooming across 2 toes. Cruz tried to hide the tremble in his jaw, but the pain was leaking through, even in silence. You should have stopped, Eli muttered, half to himself. Cruz clenched his teeth. Didn't want to slow us down. You did. Just not the way you think he reached under the bunk and dragged out an old olive-green field kit. The canvas edges were frayed, the strap still carrying sand from another lifetime. Inside, everything was in order gauze, iodine thermal wrap, and a pair of dry wool socks sealed in plastic. Axel stayed near the door, still and steady, but his head was turned. Watching Bennett, Eli set to work with mechanical precision, cleaning the wound, rubbing in salve to warm circulation, wrapping the foot tight enough to press heat back in, but not cut flow. Cruz winced but said nothing. That alone told Eli a lot. Pain he could trust. It didn't lie. Another hour in that snow, you'd have lost the toes, Eli said as he pulled the sock over the dressing. Maybe the whole foot. Cruz nodded, breathing shallow. Thanks. Thank the dog, Eli said, tossing a glance toward Axel. He kept the fire warm. Bennett, who had been pacing the far wall, stiffened. Is this a lecture or a med check? Eli didn't answer. He just tightened the second wrap. Axel hadn't moved from his position, but something in him had shifted. His ears twitched to every creak of the cabin, and his eyes had gone flat. Not aggressive, alert, calculating. And they were pinned on Bennett. Your dog's got a real attitude, Bennett said, voice tight. He reads people better than I do. Eli replied. Bennett's laugh was dry. Then maybe he's wrong this time. Axel didn't blink. Eli stood slowly, crossing to the stove. He poured fresh water into the kettle, let it settle. Silence filled the room, dense and careful. You said earlier you were tracking someone, Eli said. Bennett hesitated. Yeah. Cruz said it was a body. Bennett looked at the kid. Cruz didn't meet his eyes. We picked up a trail. Bennett finally said, Suspected felons? 3, maybe 4, running back roads near the quarry line. We caught part of a signal ping and tried to cut across. Then the storm hit, and the radio froze. Maybe Fried Eli said nothing. He could smell the lie again. It wasn't in the words, it was in the delay between them. What kind of suspects? Bennett exhaled, jaw tight. Burglary crew, armed, interstate warrants. Where'd you last see them? Near Hollow Ridge. Thought we had the jump on them. Turns out we were wrong. Eli stared at him, letting the silence draw out. Wrong how? Bennett didn't answer. That was the crack. Axel rose. It was subtle, deliberate. He moved toward Bennett, slow and silent until he stood a foot away. He didn't growl this time. Just stood there, shoulders squared, head slightly tilted like he was listening to something buried in the man's blood. Bennett shifted back. Call off your dog. Eli crossed his arms. He's not doing anything. He's staring like he knows something. Maybe he does. Cruz watched from the chair, still bundled in the blanket, color slowly returning to his face. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Eli caught the flicker. Not fear, guilt. There's more to this, Eli said quietly. Bennett stepped back. You don't know what you're talking about. Eli stepped forward. You walk through a storm like that, dragging a half-frozen rookie. You're not just chasing burglars. And you're not just lost. You're running from something, or towards it. Bennett's fists clenched. We needed shelter. That's it. No. Shelter you could have found anywhere closer. You came here, it was a light in the storm. No, you knew this place was here that stopped everything. Cruz looked up, startled. Bennett's expression shifted just enough. Eli nodded slowly. That's what I thought. Outside, a gust of wind slammed into the cabin like a wave. Snow dust rattled from the roof beams. The kettle began to hiss. Axel finally sat, but his eyes never left Bennett. His body stayed taut, a line of muscle ready to snap if the wrong move came. Eli turned to Cruz. You knew too? Cruz shook his head. No, I swear. I thought we were just looking for high ground. Eli looked back to Bennett. How do you know this cabin? Bennett didn't answer. His silence said everything. And Eli saw it then. Not a pursuit, a cover-up, a decision made too fast, in a storm too thick. And someone had gotten left behind. Not by accident, by design. Axel's tail tapped the floor once. A signal. Eli reached for the fire poker near the hearth. He didn't lift it. Just let his hand rest there. Another signal. No more lies. Time to talk, or time to act. The wind changed, not in temperature, but in tone. It moved through the trees like a whisper with teeth, slicing across the ridge behind the cabin, carrying something more than snow, something colder than frost. Axel felt it first. He lifted his head from the floor where he'd been half dozing, body coiled but still as always. His ears shifted, nose twitching in short, focused bursts. A second later, he stood. Eli noticed immediately. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl, just moved calm but alert towards the door, his body weight shifting with precision. He stopped beside the woodpile and looked back at Eli, eyes sharp, tail frozen. Eli followed, slowly, silently. He set down the cup of tea he hadn't touched and crossed the room to the window. The glass was streaked with condensation and frost, but he didn't need perfect clarity. He knew Axel's signals. This wasn't suspicion. It was certainty. He wiped a clean arc into the glass with his forearm and peered out across the front clearing. Nothing. Then movement. Left side of the tree line. 40, maybe 50 yards out. A flash of motion, just a flicker between snow-laced pines. Not wildlife. Not the slinking gait of a coyote or a moose trudging through drifts. This was upright. Human. A figure in dark clothing, hooded. The outline of a coat whipping in the wind. The head turned, barely visible, and then gone. Melted back into the forest as if it had never been there. Eli didn't speak. He didn't reach for the rifle, not yet. But his hand brushed the old bolt action leaning against the corner. Just a touch. Just enough to know it was there. Axel pressed against the doorframe now, nose still working the air, hackles lifting in a slow wave across his spine. Inside, Cruz was passed out in the armchair near the fire, lips slightly parted, face pale beneath the blanket. The heat had flushed his cheeks, but his breathing was shallow and uneven. Bennett sat across the room, one leg bouncing, hands on his knees. He was trying to act calm and failing. Eli turned from the window. "You didn't tell me anyone else was out there." Bennett didn't look up. "What are you talking about?" "There's someone in the trees." That got his attention. Bennett stood quickly, too quickly. "You sure?" Eli didn't blink. "The dog is. And I trust him more than I trust you." Bennett crossed to the other side of the room, but kept a careful distance from the door. Maybe someone from search and rescue. They could have tracked the cruiser. No flashing beacon, no call-out, no show of hands. Eli moved toward him, slow and quiet. "Who is it, Bennett?" "I don't know." "You sure about that?" Bennett hesitated, just for a second. But Axel caught it. The dog stepped forward, not aggressively, just close enough to make Bennett notice. The air thickened. "I swear, I don't know." Eli let the moment hang. Let it get uncomfortable. Let it force the truth to crawl out, even if it came slow. "You came here for a reason," Eli said. "You didn't just stumble onto my light. You're too calm, too prepared. Even your lies are practiced. I told you we were chasing a crew. You said burglars, but Cruz thinks it was a body, and now someone's watching us from the tree line. Either you're in over your head or you're dragging someone else's mess into my house." Bennett exhaled hard, wiped a hand across his mouth. "Look, all I know is we were ordered to sweep Hollow Ridge. Quiet orders, off the books. We weren't even supposed to check in unless we found something." "What did you find?" "I didn't see it myself." "Cruz did. He was ahead of me for maybe 2 minutes. When I caught up, he was white as a ghost. Wouldn't talk. Just said we had to move. That we couldn't stay, and you listened?" "He looked wrong, like something broke in him. Then the storm hit and everything went sideways. I figured if we made it to a ranger outpost, we could call it in from there. Then I saw your light." Eli didn't respond right away. He crouched beside Axel, who had returned to the window, still alert, ears twitching. "What aren't you telling me?" Eli said, not to Bennett, not even to Cruz, to the air, to the storm itself. Outside, something cracked in the forest. Not a gunshot, not thunder, a clean, dry snap, like a branch breaking under deliberate weight. Axel turned his head sharply. Whoever was out there hadn't gone far. Eli stood and moved toward the door. Bennett stepped in his way. "You're not seriously going out there?" "I'm not staying in here blind. We don't know who they are." "You don't," Eli said. He pulled on his coat, eyes flicking to Cruz, who stirred slightly but didn't wake. "You leave that chair. You do it over my dog." Bennett raised his hands. "I'm not the enemy here. Prove it," Eli said, and stepped outside into the storm. The door clicked shut behind him. Axel stayed inside. Not because Eli told him to, but because he knew the line wasn't outside. It was in the room. And Axel was guarding it. The storm had quieted, but the silence that followed felt heavier. Eli moved carefully through the tree line behind the cabin, his boots crunching over wind-hardened snow. The forest around him breathed frost, branches sagging under ice, and the sky above was the color of worn steel. Axel trotted ahead, his paws barely making a sound despite the crusted snow. His head was down, nose sweeping in tight arcs, body low to the ground like he was tracking ghosts. They found the tracks near the frozen creek bed. One set. Deep, deliberate prints that led in a straight line from the west edge of the forest toward the direction of the cabin. They were fresh made after the last gust of wind, maybe an hour old. Eli knelt beside them, studying the pattern. The stride was off. Too wide for cautious movement, too direct to be a lost hiker. Whoever left these wasn't searching. They were following something. Or someone. Axel stood at the end of the trail, ears forward, tail stiff. His breath plumed in slow clouds, his amber eyes locked on a patch of woods that gave nothing back. Eli rose and followed the tracks farther, scanning ahead. They stopped abruptly. No turn. No backtrack, just stopped. There were no prints leading away. No sign of struggle. No drag marks. No blood. Eli's skin tightened beneath his coat. He didn't speak, just looked at Axel, who took 2 slow steps forward and growled, not loud, not aggressive, but questioning. Alert. Something had been here, and now it wasn't. Eli turned back toward the cabin without a word. He moved quickly, not running, but moving like a man who understood urgency without panic. Axel stayed close, his movements tight, precise. They burst through the door just as Bennett stepped away from the window. He froze when he saw them. "What did you find?" he asked. Eli didn't answer, just walked past him, toward the fire, and began unzipping his coat with measured calm. Cruz was still out cold, breathing shallow but steady. The warmth had done its job, at least for now. Eli looked up at Bennett. "You want to tell me why there's one set of tracks leading in from the west and none leading back out?" Bennett's mouth opened, but no sound came. "Because I can guess." Eli continued. "Whoever's out there, they came in close. Too close. But they didn't leave. So unless they buried themselves in the snow, something happened. And you know what Bennett's hands flexed at his sides. You're reading into it." Axel moved beside Eli, slow and deliberate, and fixed his stare on Bennett like he was lining up a shot. Not a twitch in his muscles, just raw, calculating stillness. Eli's voice dropped. "You're not police." Bennett's face twitched, barely, but enough. It wasn't denial. It was the kind of flinch people make when they've been caught between 2 bad choices. "We were," Bennett said finally, his voice low. "Meaning?" "We were embedded. Deep undercover, 6 months inside a pipeline running stolen weapons through backwoods counties. Task force out of state. No uniforms, no contact. Everything off book." Cruz stirred in the chair. His eyes fluttered, his voice hoarse. "He's not lying." Eli didn't move. "Keep talking." Bennett exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for hours. 3 nights ago we made contact with a supplier we'd been tracking since spring. Big deal. High risk. We were told backup would meet us halfway through the handoff. But they never came. The comms died. Then one of our own pulled a weapon. Cruz shifted in his seat, groaning. They shot the target. He rasped, made it look clean. Like a justified kill. But it wasn't. They didn't want him to talk. Bennett added. He had names. People with badges. Eli's jaw clenched. And they turned on you. Bennett nodded once. We ran. Not because we were guilty, but because the second we reported it, we'd disappear like he did. You're saying law enforcement killed an informant and you're next on their list? That's exactly what I'm saying. Eli turned to Axel. The dog's tail gave one twitch, like punctuation. He hadn't taken his eyes off Bennett the entire time. Cruz pulled himself upright, wincing. We didn't know where else to go. We were supposed to be exfiltrated from Hollow Ridge, but that went to hell. We saw your light. We didn't plan this. Eli walked to the table, picked up the radio he'd taken from Bennett the night before. Still dead. But now, it wasn't just a detail. It was evidence. You could have told me. We didn't know if we could trust you. And now? Bennett looked up. His voice was quiet. Now we don't have a choice. Outside, the wind howled again, lifting fresh snow against the cabin walls. But it wasn't the storm Eli was listening to now. It was the silence between breaths, the way Axel stood guard, not over him, but over truth. And somewhere out there, in the trees, someone who never left, someone still waiting. Eli reached for the bolt on the door. We need to move before night falls, and next time you don't lie. Not to me. Not to the dog, Bennett didn't argue. He understood. The scar beneath the snow was no longer just frostbite or buried footprints. It was the truth they were standing on. And it was starting to crack. The snow was falling sideways again. Sharp wind-driven flakes that turned the forest into a white tunnel with no clear direction. Visibility had dropped to 30 feet, maybe less. Eli's coat was already stiffening from ice as he pushed through the knee-deep powder, eyes locked on Axel's trail ahead. The dog was a blur of black and tan against the snow, charging forward with a kind of urgency Eli hadn't seen since Afghanistan. Not panic. Purpose. Axel didn't bark. He didn't look back. He moved like a creature who knew exactly where he was going, like something in the wind had spoken to him directly. The kind of message only instinct could decode. Bennett stumbled behind, holding a flashlight that barely pierced the storm. "What the hell's he doing?" he shouted over the wind. Eli didn't answer. He knew better than to question a signal like this. Axel veered sharply to the left, claws tearing across frozen ground, then stopped at a patch of snow just beneath the ridge. He began to dig. Hard, fast, fur flying, breath heaving. Eli reached him in seconds. The dog had already cleared away the top layer, exposing a thin crust of ice beneath, cracked like old glass. Blood. Just a smear, faded and nearly frozen over, but unmistakable. Not fresh. Not ancient. "Back," Eli ordered softly. Axel stepped aside, though his nose stayed close, pacing in tight, anxious circles. Eli dropped to his knees and used his gloved hands to widen the hole. Bennett reached them, breathing hard, panic rising in his voice. "What is it?" Eli didn't speak. He just pointed to the blood. Then he kept digging. 3 inches down, the ice gave way to fabric. Then skin. Then movement. "Jesus!" Eli grabbed the fabric, tugged gently. It was a jacket, a tactical vest beneath. Cold as steel. He cleared more snow, and a face emerged, half covered by frost, lips purple, eyes closed. Duct tape over the mouth, wrists bound with wire behind his back. "Help me." Bennett dropped beside him without hesitation. Together they lifted the body out, careful not to jostle the limbs too hard. The man was young, maybe mid-30s. His badge was half buried in the folds of his coat, but the lettering was clear. Officer Daniel Hart. Real law enforcement. Still alive. Barely. Eli ripped the tape from the man's face and listened close. A weak gasp escaped his cracked lips, followed by a shallow wheeze. "Still breathing," Eli said, "but we're close." Axel hovered near Hart's head, nose working furiously, ears twitching like antennas locked on a fraying signal. He gave one short, urgent bark, the first since leaving the cabin, and nudged the officer's shoulder gently, like he was reminding him to hold on. "We need to get him back." "Now," Bennett said, voice tight. But Eli was staring at the bindings. Industrial wire, cut and twisted. This wasn't field improvisation. It was planned, clean, professional. Left here to freeze. Left here to be found. Or to disappear. Eli looked up at Bennett. "You knew about him?" "No," Bennett said quickly, shaking his head. "Swear to God, I didn't know they left someone behind. They didn't leave him." "They buried him." Axel stepped between them, eyes fixed on Bennett. Not accusatory, not hostile, but alert. Reading breath, reading posture, listening for tremors in the truth. Bennett's hands went up. "We didn't do this." "I didn't. Cruz and I were chasing leads, not cleaning up messes." Eli stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Get the sled." They worked fast. The snowmobile was still warm from earlier runs. Within minutes, they had Hart wrapped in emergency blankets and loaded onto the sled. Axel climbed in first, lying beside him, pressing his body to the man's chest like a living furnace. Bennett watched it all unfold in stunned silence. "He knew," he said, almost to himself. "Your dog knew there was someone here." Eli checked the engine, gave the throttle a sharp rev, then looked back at him. He didn't bark for nothing. They pushed off, carving a path back through the storm. The engine screamed against the wind, but inside the sled, Axel never moved from Hart's side. He stayed pressed close, breathing slow and steady, anchoring the man to life with every second that passed. By the time they reached the cabin, Hart's eyes had fluttered open once, just enough to see the dog watching him, just enough to whisper something no one understood, but Axel seemed to. Cruz, groggy but alert now, helped them get Hart onto the cot. His face went pale the second he saw the badge. "That's the contact," he whispered. "That's the one they said never showed. He was the target. They were supposed to kill him." Eli turned to Bennett. "So now we know." Bennett's voice cracked. "They were going to pin it on us." "They still might." Axel lay down beside Hart's cot, his chest rising and falling, eyes never closing, ears tilted toward the door. Not guarding territory, guarding truth. And for the first time, Eli realized they weren't just hiding from the cold anymore. They were fighting to survive something far colder. At first, Officer Daniel Hart couldn't speak. The cold had stolen the muscles from his face, his body still trembling in waves. But as Eli poured hot broth into a tin mug and brought it to his lips, something returned. Not strength exactly, but focus, and fear. And Hart's lips cracked as he tried to form a sentence. "They're not who they say they are." Eli leaned in, nodding for him to go on. Hart's voice was hoarse, barely audible. "The team. The task force. They're bought." "What do you mean?" Bennett asked, already knowing the answer. "They're not running an op. They're covering one up." Hart shifted, his breathing ragged. Axel stood next to the cot, not moving, eyes on the man's face like he was translating more than words, reading scent, stress, pulse. Hart continued. "I was part of a sting trafficking network. Children, women. It went high, way higher than we thought. We found names, senior brass, politicians. Then our comms died. GPS shut off. Within hours the team started disappearing." Eli stiffened. "You mean taken out?" Hart gave a weak nod. They issued a warrant on me. Said I went rogue, but the whole thing was flipped. They were hunting me before I could talk. Bennett swallowed hard. Cruz and I were next. Hart turned his eyes to Bennett. They framed you. You were getting close to the truth. Before anyone could respond, a sharp, metallic chirp pierced the room. The old radio panel on the wall, the one no one had touched in years, flickered. Static, then a voice. "This is Agent Kara Jensen, Internal Affairs." Repeat. Kara Jensen. Receiving emergency ping from covert relay node Delta 9. Please respond. Eli snapped toward the radio. His hand moved faster than thought. This is Eli Brooks, U.S. Army veteran, K9 handler. You're receiving an old distress signal from a ranger station outside Summit Ridge. You need to hear this. Axel perked up instantly, ears locked on the voice. Jensen's voice returned, crisp and urgent. Signal shows activation just under 90 minutes ago. Source was presumed decommissioned 5 years ago. How did you access it? Eli looked at Axel. He did. He explained quickly how Axel had pawed at a covered box under the cabin floor earlier that morning. Eli had assumed it was just old wiring. Axel had growled once, then sat beside it, alert. Eli had flipped the breaker switch out of curiosity. Apparently that curiosity just saved their lives. Jensen's voice hardened. Hold position. I'm inbound via Snowcat from Northgate Outpost. 30 minutes. Bennett stood frozen, one hand still resting on his sidearm, like the room might suddenly collapse around them. She's the real deal. Hart whispered. Jensen tried to warn me before the raid. They pushed her out, transferred her to desk work. Now she was coming. Eli looked at Hart. You sure she's clean? Hart didn't hesitate. She's the only one I'd trust with Axel in the room. Axel blinked slowly, as if he approved. 30 minutes passed in a slow, charged silence. Every branch crack outside became a possible threat. Eli stayed by the window, scanning through narrow frosted glass. Bennett kept his back to the fire, not for warmth, but cover. Then headlights. A narrow beam cut through the snow and grew brighter. Eli raised his rifle, then lowered it when he saw the badge flash behind the glass. Kara Jensen was not what anyone expected. She stepped inside in a snow-dusted parka, her presence calm but not soft. Sharp eyes, civilian clothes, but nothing casual about her. She moved like someone used to fighting wars where paperwork killed faster than bullets. Axel approached her directly. Eli tensed. Axel rarely approached strangers. But the dog stopped inches from her and sat. Jensen nodded. Smart dog. Smarter than most people, Eli replied. Within minutes, the situation unfurled. Jensen reviewed the false warrant Cruz had saved on a burner drive. She listened to Hart, asked direct questions. She already knew most of the answers. The pieces she didn't know made her jaw clench. The trafficking rings connected to internal funding routes. Money moved through Black Ops logistics, marked as training operations, most of it overseas. But the manpower's domestic. Contractors, burned agents, a few dirty task forces, and they wanted it buried. Eli said. They still do. Jensen answered. Axel stood near her boot, his tail still, his posture wary. He was listening too. She looked at him. He led you to Hart. He did, Eli said. Then he's the reason we have a witness. Axel blinked once. Quiet acknowledgement. Jensen turned to the group. There's no going back. You're all targets now. What do we do? Bennett asked. We go public. But first we go ghost. Eli looked down at Axel. The dog's eyes met his. Focused, steady, ready. They weren't running anymore. They were going to turn around and hunt. The air was sharp enough to cut skin. Snow blew sideways like a living thing, obscuring the trail that barely qualified as one. They had 15 miles of backcountry ahead of them, and every mile was a test of nerve, muscle, and trust, especially trust in a battered snowcat that growled with each gear shift and in the dog running point like his life depended on it. Because it did. All of theirs did. Axel loped ahead, pausing every few yards to glance back at the convoy. Eli at the wheel, Kara beside him with a loaded rifle across her lap, Bennett in the back helping Cruz stay conscious. The younger soldier had taken a fall at the last outpost and re-aggravated an old leg injury. Now he was bundled under thermal wraps, jaw clenched through the pain, but his eyes were locked on Axel. "He's not even winded," he muttered. "Don't jinx it," Bennett said, but the admiration in his voice was clear. The terrain was brutal, ice-slick switchbacks, frozen creek beds, and dead trees that seemed to rise from the earth just to block their way. There was no margin for error. One misstep, and the snowcat would slide straight off a ridge. Jensen scanned a topo map pinned to her thigh. "Next ridge is the choke point," she said. "If they're tracking us, it's where they'll wait." Eli nodded. "We have no choice. The other routes are closed, or worse. They know that too," Jensen added grimly. Suddenly, Axel froze mid-stride. His body stiffened, head low, ears rotating like radar dishes. Then he barked once short and sharp. Eli slammed the brakes. "What is it?" Bennett asked. Before anyone could answer, the faint, mechanical hum echoed through the trees. Not wind, not a storm, something artificial. And closing in. Jensen pulled out a small device from her jacket. "Drone scanner just pinged. We've got a tracker in the air." Eli's face went still. "We're in the open. Cruz can't run," Bennett said. "Not fast." Not through this. Axel turned, nose twitching. Then he made a decision. Without warning, the dog sprinted off the trail and dove into the thick snow line, his body disappearing behind a ridge. "No, no, no, Axel!" Eli shouted, about to leap out. Jensen grabbed his arm. "Wait, he's drawing it." The drone buzz grew louder, sharper, shifting direction. A sleek black dot appeared in the distant sky, cutting through the snow like a shark's fin through water. And it was chasing Axel. The dog zigzagged through the clearing, barking at intervals, leading the drone across the slope. The device dropped altitude, likely reading his heat signature. It descended, followed, chased. Eli's hands gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles went bloodless. "Come on, boy. Stay low. Stay smart." In the distance, the drone closed in. Then Axel disappeared. The drone hovered above the spot for a moment. Then its red targeting lights blinked, and the drone plunged after him, straight into the dense woods. 5 seconds later, a flash. An explosion, muffled by snow, but sharp enough to rock the ridge. Bennett flinched. "No." Eli didn't move, couldn't speak. Then, through the haze movement, a limping figure emerged from the smoke and snow, soaked and shaking but alive. Axel. He staggered once, then trotted forward, one paw dragging but tail held high. Jensen exhaled. He found the ice trap. Lured it in, Eli jumped down and sprinted to meet him, falling to his knees. "Easy, buddy. Easy. You did it," Axel pressed into him, panting hard but eyes bright. A low whine escaped him, a sound not of pain, but urgency. He was telling them, "Go. Now." Eli scooped him up and turned to the others. "We move." That bought us 5 minutes. The team powered forward. Cruz groaned, but held on as Bennett supported him. The snowcat engine whined as it rolled over the next ridge. By the time they reached the control checkpoint, a real one this time, with reinforced barriers and federal security, Axel was curled in Eli's arms, barely moving, but still alert. The guards raised weapons until Jensen flashed her badge and barked their clearance code. Inside, warmth hit them like a wave. But no one relaxed. "We have footage," Jensen said, snapping her fingers toward the analyst station. "The drone feed. if any of it survived the crash. Pullet technicians moved fast. Bennett leaned down and scratched behind Axel's ears. "You crazy mutt," he whispered. "You just saved 4 federal witnesses." Eli knelt beside him, his eyes damp. "He's not a mutt." Everyone turned. "He's a soldier," Eli said softly. "And he just led us out of a war zone." Axel thumped his tail once, just once, then drifted into sleep, still on alert, even in dreams. The air inside the federal outpost buzzed with tension. Snow dripped from their boots, steam rising from their shoulders as warmth seeped in through layers of exhaustion. But none of them relaxed. Not yet. Axel lay wrapped in a wool blanket near the command desk, still breathing shallow but steady. One paw was bandaged, the result of frostbite and his daring decoy sprint. His head rested on Eli's foot like an anchor, as if to remind him, "I'm still here." Across the room, Kara Jensen stood with her hands on her hips, staring at the data that now filled the wall of monitors. The files from Bennett's encrypted drive, accessed via Cruz's device, painted a picture darker than any of them had imagined. "God," she whispered. "What is it?" Eli asked, standing beside her. "It's not just one bad apple. This was a network. Multiple precincts, county-level collusion. The sheriff, 2 deputies, a field commander in Homeland's anti-trafficking task force, all listed in payout logs." Bennett sat nearby, face pale but calm. "That's what we were trying to leak. When we realized our unit was compromised, we knew we had to get it to someone clean." "And you found her," Jensen said, eyes locking with Eli. "He's not just a soldier. He's a human firewall." Cruz groaned from the cot, trying to sit up. "You stay down, soldier," one of the medics warned. "You're lucky that leg's still attached." "I'll take lucky over dead," Cruz muttered. Jensen pulled out her secure phone and dialed. "I'm escalating this to the DOJ task force. We'll need full witness protection for Bennett and Cruz. They'll want everything we've got," Eli said. He reached into his pack and pulled out a zip drive. "Here's the rest. Metadata, movement logs, comms with handlers. All from Bennett's rig. Jensen took it, hesitating for just a beat." "You sure? I've seen what happens when this stuff goes dark," Eli said. "We've got one shot at taking this whole network down. That drive doesn't belong in a desk drawer behind them." Axel stirred. "Besides," Eli added, kneeling to check the dog's side, "he didn't risk his life for us to hide." An officer approached, his face grim. "You'll want to hear this. The sheriff's been taken into custody." Jensen turned sharply. "Already? We moved fast," he replied. "He tried to destroy his phone when our team arrived." But he didn't know the call logs were already flagged. What was he trying to do? Tip off the handlers. They were already moving assets. Eli stood. "Meaning more victims would vanish?" The officer nodded. "We got to him in time," he added, "but barely." Bennett sat up straighter. "Do they know about the bunker?" "We're prepping a raid now. Thanks to your files, we've got coordinates." Silence settled for a beat. Then Cruz spoke. "We should have died on that ridge." "But you didn't," Jensen said. "You endured. And now every piece you brought us helps dismantle a system that's been hiding in plain sight." Axel gave a low chuff, as if to punctuate her words. Later that night, Jensen visited Eli in the rec room. He was sitting beside Axel, hand gently stroking the dog's scarred ear. A fire crackled low in the corner. "You ever think about putting him down?" she asked quietly. Eli didn't look away from Axel. "I did. Once, right after he came home. He wouldn't let me near him, wouldn't eat, wouldn't bark, just sat in the corner, waiting to die. And now," Eli smiled faintly, "now he's the only one I trust to watch my back." Jensen pulled up a chair. I filed your statement. You and Axel, you're officially cleared. Eli raised an eyebrow. You're also reinstated. As of 20 minutes ago. They want you back on the team. I didn't ask for that. I know. But we need people who won't back down when it gets ugly, and dogs who don't bark for glory. Eli chuckled softly. You sound like you've read my file. I did, she replied. All of it. He looked at her then. And I think you're not done yet. Axel shifted in his sleep, pressing closer to Eli's side. I think none of us are. The morning of the ceremony arrived cloaked in quiet snow, as if nature itself knew better than to celebrate too loudly. They'd wanted a parade. Medals. Press, Eli had said no. No cameras, he'd told the state representative. No speeches. Just one plaque. For him, the officials complied. Mostly. A modest ceremony was held at the precinct's outdoor memorial wall, with just a handful of trusted faces in attendance. Cruz was wheeled in by Kara, leg still in a brace but grinning through the bruises. Bennett stood behind them, back straight in a clean uniform, reinstated but already planning to resign. The sheriff's office had been gutted, the network exposed. It would take years to rebuild trust, but something had shifted. Axel didn't sit still during the proceedings. He circled the courtyard slowly, nose twitching at scents in the snow, eyes scanning the crowd as if still on patrol. No barking, no growling. Just that measured presence, the one that had once sent traffickers scattering and now made senators clear their throats. Eli stood a few feet back, hands in his coat pockets, watching from the sidelines. He didn't want a seat at the front. Didn't need his name on any program. Later that afternoon, back at the cabin he now called home, Eli lit the wood stove and opened his old field journal. He flipped past pages of unfinished thoughts, torn corners, and half-written letters. Near the back he found a blank sheet and scribbled a single line. He didn't bark for glory. He barked for the truth. He left the book open on the desk and moved to the window. Outside, Axel sat under the tall pine that marked the property line, ears forward, still watching. They didn't need words between them. Not anymore. That night, Eli received a message from Cruz. It was a short video, low-res, time-stamped from the outpost recorded without anyone noticing. The camera had been left running on a desk, pointed loosely at the corner where the wounded had rested. The screen shook as boots thudded by, then settled. The clip showed 3 young soldiers asleep against the wall. Their jackets were folded behind their heads, skin pale from blood loss but breathing. And there in the center, nestled between them, was Axel. Eyes half-lidded, alert, tail still, every muscle still holding vigil. And then, a soft sound, barely audible, a breath, not a bark, not a growl, just a sigh, not of fear, of relief, of trust returning, of a promise kept. Eli closed his laptop and leaned back. He thought of all the times people had asked him how he trained Axel, how he fixed a dog with scars so deep even vets had given up. He never had an answer for them. Because the truth was, Axel had never needed fixing. He just needed a reason to believe again. They both did. Before shutting off the lights, Eli whispered into the quiet, "You did good, partner." Axel didn't move, but his tail thumped once. The story could end there. But maybe it doesn't have to. Because somewhere out there, another soldier is sleeping lighter because of a warm muzzle at their side. Another child is breathing easier because a dog stood between them and harm. And maybe someone, right now, is thinking of the one companion who never left, never doubted, never needed a reason to stay loyal. So before this story fades, one question remains. What's your story with a loyal pet? Tell us in the comments. And if you believe dogs like Axel deserve to be seen, honored, and remembered, subscribe to the German Shepherd channel. Because their stories aren't done And neither are we.